Hello, Mass. Thank you for being on this podcast. It is so great to have you on here.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for having me on. I've really been looking forward to this.
Yes, so am I, because of what you're going to bring to this episode. I'm really excited about this. So let's just dig in. Let's start from the beginning, okay? And I want to get to know you. My audience wants to get to know you a little bit better. What is your story, your background, and what led you to do what you're doing today?
So, I was that annoying kid that was always so curious. So, since I was as old as I remember, I wanted to learn about things. I was asking weird questions. My dad always tells the story about a trip with my brother and my mom and my dad, and we were going to France. And I was sitting in the car and looking out the window, and I started asking like, why is a cow called a cow? Why is it not a horse? What if I call it a horse? Is it then a cow? Um, those like weird questions, and my brother would get very mad. Just tell me like, Mads, don't ask those dumb questions. It's a cow because it's a cow. So since that early age, I had that curiosity about learning new things and super eagerness about like, yeah, getting to understand like the small details and kind of like how the world works. So that's kind of the early stage. I was lucky that my dad entertained all of my weird ideas and found it fun and charming instead of telling me to shut up and stop asking dumb questions. So I think that's really the basis of where like I got to today is that curiosity, and then there's been like 1,000 steps in between, like work wise and life wise.
Yeah. So I love that, like that curious kid, right? You're just asking the questions, and we should we should be asking the questions. We should be curious because that curiosity will lead you to knowledge, will lead you to, just experiences too, right? So different experiences. So how did you get to where you are today? Like what transpired within that time, or between that time?
Yeah. So the long story short, in my teen years, I saw people really struggling mentally, and that got me even more curious again about like what is it that makes a difference from someone thriving and someone being in a really tough situation. Like, how can it be that we objectively live better than kings and queens used to do? Like, we
Um,
have all the spices in the world. We have television, we have heat, we have flushing toilets. Like, no king could have that back then. We have access to all the music. We used to be able to fly around the world, like things that kings and queens would not be able to do. Yet, we have such a high rate of people that are unhappy and people that are depressed. That kind of became an obsession to understand like how can that be, and like you see one person coming from a hard background and someone coming that's being given so much, and yet they go different paths. Like it might be the one coming from a hard place that actually end up being happy. And one of the situations in my life, I was lucky, I was in India, and I saw in the streets kids sitting in the side of the road and they looked extremely happy. And it was like they had nothing, they hardly had food, and they were like, that was kind of their home. And at the same time, I come from a working background, but my mom's brother, he did really well from banking and so on, and his son, he never really seemed happy, and he had all the material wealth, right? So that made me even more curious about like, okay, what is it that drives us to have a happy life? Because it's clearly not only financial success. So what are the things that drives a happy life? And that kind of became a question from everything that I work with, whether it's like building new companies or coaching individuals on how to find meaning in their life.
that's great. And I hear it often, and I do agree that happiness has to come within, from within, right? Um, Obviously the self-development world teaches us, or is basically saying what exactly you're saying. It's not just the external things that come into your life that will make you happy, or I will be happy when, right? It's what you are experiencing in this time, in this now, that will make you happy.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, but do you think it's also being mindful, like being mindful of and aware of what we have? Like you said, kings and queens back in the day didn't have any of the stuff that we had. Yet they were royalty, they were kings, they were queens, they were rulers. I mean, I don't know if they were happy.
No, that's a good question.
But I would say that, you know, it's we have more than they do. So it's not, maybe they weren't happy. And that also goes into play to where they did have a lot. We have a lot. So that material lifestyle does not mean that you're going to be happy. So now
No.
I'm curious. Um, how are we able to increase the happiness then?
Yeah. So there's different ways, and I think first it's important to understand what happiness is. So Martin Seligman, who's like the father of positive psychology,
Mm-hmm.
like if you look him up, there's a great TED talk with him as well, and you might already have seen it. He talks about the three different kinds of happiness that we need to be aware of. The first is hedonic happiness. Hedonic happiness is what most of us are chasing. It's that fantastic feeling of good chocolate, good food, a good movie, sex, having fun, playing a game. That's one way of happiness. And the problem with that is it's a wonderful form and we need it. The problem is like the more chocolate you eat, you don't get that much more happy. And you very quickly adjust, same as like a really nice apartment. Like, wow, that's fantastic. But then very quickly you adjust to the quality of that apartment and no longer gives you that joy. So we can only have like, there's only a certain amount of hedonic happiness that we can actually have in our life because we adjust so fast. The second form is flow. And I can't pronounce the name of
I
the
know who
wonderful
you're
guy.
talking about.
Yeah,
Mikhail Chekin. Yes, exactly.
exactly, exactly.
Exactly. I know it's a long last name, so I won't put you through that. Go ahead.
No,
I'll
that's
put
where
it
I
in
end
the
as
show
well.
notes. I'll put it in the
Yeah,
show notes for everybody. Mm-hmm.
but flow is that state where everything disappears around us. It's where we are like we're not really feeling that much. It's just like a weird state of just being immersed in something, and it often happens when we're trying something that's a little bit difficult, but still so we can actually do it. And that's that hard thing, but that just immerses us. We don't notice anything else. And finding flow is one of the other forms of happiness that we can ensure. And then the last part that he talks about is meaning and helping others. So being of service. And that's something most religions talk about as well, that like the real happiness is contributing to others. So understanding those three different kinds of happiness is super helpful. We know, I think I don't remember the numbers, but some of our happiness is determined by our genes, is at least our current understanding today. But a big part is those three, and then we can actually work on how to increase each of them.
Yeah, I mean Martin Seligman. You know, that's who I studied in school. Positive
Fantastic.
psychology, all of that. So character strengths, you know, all of those things is key to happiness. So I'm glad that you mentioned that and kind of broke it down for us because I really do want my audience to understand how important it is to, you know, understand those three different dynamics,
Mm.
those three different, and then flow. Really, flow, I think, has, you know, it's hard. It's definitely hard nowadays, right? We're always distracted. We're always looking at our phones. Like our phones are like so addicting, and we can't keep our hand. It's neurological too. We can't keep our hands off of it, right? But when you're in that flow state, whatever you're doing, whatever you're passionate about doing, whatever you're, it just time goes by. And yeah, and then you go back to the way we were before these devices came in our lives, right? So that is definitely very, very important. Thank you for sharing that too.
But it is magical being in flow. But back to what you
Yeah.
said earlier as well, also that being grateful. So one of the things that we also know from a countless amount of studies is count your blessings. And I find it interesting that a lot of things that was part of religions back in the days, we're now starting to find with science is really good. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, like saying grace at dinner. So one of the things that's been studies on is that you write down three things you're grateful for each day or at the end of the day. I do it like I've done it since 2013. Like at the end of the night before I go to bed, when I'm lying, I write down three things, or share it with someone. or think it out at least. But I make sure that I think it. The good thing about writing it down is that at the end of each year, I sit and look at my year and I become more aware of what is it actually that makes me really happy. So what other things? But so becoming aware of like the small things, it could be like a smile from a stranger. It'll be the conversation with you today. That's not a small thing, but the connection with another human being. It will be that I had a good morning workout, and the guy that I had the sparring with the Thai boxing, he was a super friendly guy, and there was like a good connection, a good workout. So all of those small, some big things, writing them down and becoming aware of it, that's a huge thing. And it's when people ask me, I always recommend that as the first because it's the easiest thing. It doesn't take that much, and it just helps.
Yeah. No, you're right on. You're right on with that. It's journaling, those, and I heard that too, journaling your three, I mean, you could do like one or two if you want, if you don't have time, but really three shouldn't be any issue because that's easy, like you said. But it also shifts the mindset, right? It also shifts, and especially if you do it at night, you're priming your brain to think differently before you go to sleep so that when you wake up, you're in that state of mind. You're in that rest, that relaxed and that positive state of mind.
So instead of going to sleep thinking about all the
What
worries
you
and
have to
all the
do.
stress, you go to
Mm-hmm.
sleep feeling grateful about the good things.
Exactly. Exactly. That's awesome. So I want
It
to
also
shift it. Yeah.
rewires, just like to put more, it rewires the brain. So basically, like what we're looking for, we're going to see more of. So we're creating pathways for the positive. And one of the problems with today's society is like the news are so negative. The news are not representative of how the world actually is. It looks much worse in the news. So that's part of rewiring our brains. If we look a lot, like we follow a lot of news, to see that the world must be really bad, the world must be really dangerous. Where when we start focusing on the positive, we start to see more positive. Also, when you do it at the end of the day, you might have had like the last couple of hours were not that good, but then you do this exercise and you realize like, wow, I had an amazing day. I forgot that like when we just started talking, like when I started sharing about what I was grateful for, I realized again like, hey, that connection with that guy that I was doing Muay Thai with, that was actually like something to be grateful for. So you realize as well that a lot of your days are a lot better than you actually think when you go to bed.
Yeah. And I mean, we always focus on the bad, right? It's like, oh, that happened. Oh, oh, that was great, and then you just brush it away, right? Again, that's the bringing the awareness. How did you feel when that happened? I mean, how did you, a lot of times when you are in that gratitude, like, oh my God, this guy, smiled at me. He was a great sparring partner. The reason why you remember it after, when you're writing it down is because there was a feeling there,
Mm.
right? There was there, your heart was open. You were smiling. You were in that state. And we, in the moment, quickly like dismiss it. And it's only when we have to look back at it that we understand that those feelings. And I don't know if I'm right with saying this, but is it when you practice more, being grateful and being in the moment and everything, I would think that the more you practice, the more you're able to bring that with you day in and day out. Whereas those negative mindset, the negative feelings, they'll come, of course, but they won't come as often as they did if you change again your perception, your mindset on those good feelings, those grateful feelings. So yeah. Anything else about that?
I could talk for hours about it, but
I
but I
I
think
could
the
too.
most
I mean,
it's such a
yeah,
powerful thing. But I really like urge the listeners to test it out. The
yeah,
studies are showing when they actually tested it that it created the most happiness if you only did it a few times a week. The reason for that is most of the tests are being done on university students as well, and people feel pressure if they have to do it every single day. So that feeling of guilt of not doing it. Most people that end up getting into a habit of it do it most days.
yeah.
Um, but so when starting the habit, like just don't blame yourself or like hit yourself in the head if you only do it like 3 times or 2 times a week. It's really just like working on getting it into a habit, and it's going to become more and more natural. And it might end up being a thing that you don't want to go to bed before thinking. And
Right.
then I'll stop about the gratitude journey, rambling about that. But
No, I mean, I'm right there with you. So what about, I was talking about character strengths, right? One of my top 3 character strengths is gratitude. So I'm all about that. I think that's just one of those things that we need to have more in our life. Because once you're grateful of what you have, you get more up, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, why not? But it is teaching that, and it is kind of bringing that into practice that kind of gets a little harder. But
What's your 2 other ones?
love is number 1,
Yeah.
and then hope. So those are my 3, and then I have top 5 is love of learning and zest. So very heart centered,
Yeah.
very heart centered, very what's it called, transcendent. So there's different forms of the character strength. So most of them are in the transcendent bucket, not so much in the mental bucket, but all good. That's who I am. But yeah. So have you ever taken the character strength survey at all? No?
No.
Okay.
I might have to.
I'm gonna send you the link.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious, because I think actually I know your number 1 is curiosity. But I
It.
mean, who knows? I say that now, but we'll never know. But I want to send you the link,
Sure.
so you could see what your top character strengths are.
Yeah. But I think you're
Awesome.
very close in that. When I've done exercises at Tony Robbins events,
Yeah.
like the number 1 value often comes up growth and learning.
Yes.
Um, and then I had to reorder that, being so growth oriented, to focus more on health and love, which I'm doing now. And that also got me closer. Now I have a wonderful girlfriend because I'm prioritizing it more than just
Nice.
learning new things all the time. But
Nice.
you have
It's
things that are more natural for you, right?
right. And it's not to where, again, any of the strengths or anything is negative because they're on the bottom. It just means you don't use them a lot, and we use certain character strength, certain things in our lives a little bit more. And then maybe, like you said, what are my bottom strengths and how could
Mm.
I work on these more to bring them to light a little bit? And then switch it to see, you open the door. You open the door to, have your, girlfriend come in, and um, that's wonderful. That's kind of also, it's kind of like the holistic being of you, right? It's taking those strengths that you, or those character strengths, and making others work for you as well, I should say. Awesome. So I kind of want to move on a little bit. I know, again, we could talk about this forever, but I mean, kind of going along the same, really, same form of what we're talking about here is, can you tell us about how, you talk a lot about habits, right? And in my world too, in my what I do is I call it like behavior change, but it's also habitual change, right?
Mm.
It's things that we take on, whether good or bad. It takes on a mind of itself and gets habitual. But what um how do you build great habits? So instead of, well, maybe changing them, but how do you build the great habits?
Yes, that's a good question, Elizabeth. So several things, both like what the research is saying, and then more like the intuitive stuff. So starting with the more intuitive, I haven't seen the proper studies on it. I'll get to some of the studies afterwards. But the whole thing about, like, often we chase a goal of, like, I want to lose 10 kilos. I want to run a marathon.
Mhm.
We know that most people that lose weight gain it back after. That's when it's like very focused on the outcome instead of the identity. James Clear writes in his book about, we have outcome change, we have process change, which are the habits to get there, and then we have identity change. So many people focus, I have to lose 10 kilos, that's the outcome. Then what are the habits? I will count all of my food, the calories, and I will make sure I'm in deficit, and I will exercise a certain amount. And then that might change my identity from being an obese person to something else. With high self-discipline, you'll definitely get there. But it's not that enjoyable, right? And
Right.
it doesn't sustain us often. Where if we, instead of focusing on losing 10 kilos, focus on, who do I want to be? Who am I as a person? Then it's easier to find the habits and the routines that are aligned with the person that you want to be. It's easier for us to sustain changes or do things that align with the person that we want to be. and then it's easy. Then you'll get the results. It might take you a little bit longer, but you're more likely to actually sustain them. So I think that's super important to start with that, being like, hey, who do you want to be? What life do you want to live?
Yeah.
Instead of just hearing the newest podcast about this cool habit that you should do, be like, okay, but is that me? Like, there's so much pressure of people seeing social media. I should be this and this person. I was gonna fuck no, sorry my language.
No,
Like, you
go
need to
ahead.
be like, who are you and what makes you happy? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
about all the other people. It matters about who do you want to be, what makes you happy, and then you need to find some habits. Of course, if you're only an artist, not only an artist, but understand my language right,
Yeah.
there needs to be something about movement. But if you're an artist, it might be more about dancing. It might be that movement. It might be walking in nature and so on. So you build those, like you choose the habits that are more aligned with your identity. And then you might put in, if there's nothing where you get your pulls up in any of the identity that you want to be, you put in those 7 minutes 3 times a week of hit like high intensity training that you force yourself to, just to make sure that you live a long healthy life. But that can probably get in as well. But as long as you're doing the movement, the dancing, the walking in nature, hiking or whatever, like you still get so many of the health benefits to live a good life.
Yeah.
So that's the one part.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Is there any more? Or
yeah. So
okay.
that's the more intuitive part, you could say. The
Okay.
thing that we have more research on is called mental contrasting and implementation intentions.
Okay.
Those are 2 fancy academic words. If you go to PubMed, which is the research database for health research, you will find 19,900 studies on mental contrasting, the last time I looked, and 4,900 on implementation intentions. So it's been researched quite a lot. Does this help in behavior change or not? And like, there's nothing that's just like a magic pill and then like it's super easy. But we know mental contrasting is that you think about the change that you want to make, the goal that you want to reach. So, and then you think about all the positive things, like what are you going to get out of it? So you create that strong motivation, and ideally you close your eyes and you think into everything you're going to get out of actually getting that goal. So the listeners might pick something now, one thing they want to accomplish, close their eyes, really think about all the amazing things that's going to happen. And then second, you think about,
Visualize, right? It's like
yes,
having the visualization of what it looks like and what it'll feel like.
yeah,
Yeah.
that rises the motivation, and also it creates something else in us, something we haven't been able to, at least I haven't seen the same research on, like that whole thing about being heartfelt and that you feel it, but many of us that are working with people know it makes a huge difference. But once you have that, you think about what are the challenges you're going to face. So that's mental contrasting. We know that works, but we know it works best if we combine it with implementation intentions. There's several studies that have actually tested like if you only do one or the other, or you do them combined. So we know implementation intention helps. That is when, where, and how will you do this exercise or like this habit. So let's say that the habit is that you wanna meditate in the morning, or you want to meditate, and then your implementation intention, okay, I will meditate first thing in the morning. I will do it at a specific spot in my living room, and I will sit on my mat, and I'll do that 5 times a week. And then, so that's one part. The second part is saying like, what are the 3 most likely things that are going to happen? That means that I won't do it. And what can I do to avoid that?
Kind of like roadblocks or challenges, right?
Exactly.
Like obstacles. Yeah.
So following that is actually fairly simple. And some of the studies, just to come with examples, and now I know your listeners as well, most of them are women. There was a study done on women trying to help them eat healthier, or eat more vegetables and fruit. And one group got information about how it would be much better to do this. And the other group, they learned about implementation intentions and mental contrasting. And they did both those exercises. So they actually, both of the groups actually increased their level of how much fruit they ate. But after 2 years, they actually followed up on the 2 groups. So it was like a fairly long study. And it turned out that both groups were still eating more vegetables. But the group, now I'll try and see if I can remember the number exactly.
Okay.
It was around 8% that the group that only received the information had increased, where the other group had actually increased something like 28%.
Wow.
Plus minus a few percent.
Yeah.
After 2 years of just doing this exercise and learning about healthier food. And like, if you work with a lot of people, you know that many people don't follow through. So just using this simple exercise, it's not a guarantee that like you're going to succeed with all of your habits, but we know that it has a higher likelihood of actually succeeding.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of putting that visualization,
Hmm.
like I mentioned, in their, in their brain. Kind of like what would that look like, right? My question to you with that, would you
And it was
have
7
to,
and 28.
I'm
So
sorry?
7%, it was 7 and 28. So
Oh,
28% more.
28%.
Yeah,
Wow.
more.
That is amazing.
That's a big increase
Yeah.
after 2 years.
Yeah. That is amazing. And so it works. That's all, that's all we have to say. It works. We have to kind of implement this in order to, excuse me,
Yeah.
in order to um, change that habit or change that behavior, right? Um, I do have a question. So is there anything that's mentioned like um kind of like getting to the root cause of why they did it in the beginning? Like what happened? Why were they not eating the vegetables? Or is
So
it
often,
just, basically like this is what's going to look like when you do eat more vegetables?
so these studies are because it's expensive to do studies,
Yeah,
and one of the key things in studies is that you don't test for too many things
got it.
because if you test for 5 variables or 10 variables, you will confirm some of them. Like statistically, there's a higher chance. So that's one of the key things from figuring it out. So it only tests like if we give a control group one intervention and another one this intervention, will it be more effective? So that's
Yeah.
basically where they've been testing many different things. But there
Okay.
is no doubt like what you're asking to like what about the emotional baggage that we have? There might be something deeper in us that we need to go and work on and do some personal development work, and that might be a reason why it wasn't higher or the people that had bigger challenges with doing it. I
Right.
would say some of um, so the personal development work is extremely important that we kind of get that out, and that's the hardest part. The easier part is following exercise like this. It's writing down that we tie up the habit to another habit. We know that's quite effective as well. So like after I go to the toilet, when I go out, I'll do deep breathing, 5 deep breaths.
Mhm.
After I get my morning coffee, or right before I get my morning coffee, once I've brewed it, I will do 5 squats.
Got it.
Um, all of those things we also know is quite effective, and we know that the environment is extremely important. Probably the most important thing is the environment because you can have someone with emotional baggage, not do implementation intentions and so on. You put them in the right environment, and suddenly habits become easy. If
Yeah.
they're around the right people, things are like super easy to get to. You put someone that do all the right exercises in the wrong environment, and it's a matter of time before if they're with the wrong people, they'll stop doing the healthy habits and they'll fall into the other thing. That's the harder thing to put into a process.
Right. Oh, of course. Of course. And it's all individualized. You really can't group that as well because it's up to, yeah, that's more individualized and that is harder to
Yeah.
to capture. But I mean, this obviously this way works, right? It's obvious. It's just that's really probably a good platform to start from. It's a good way to see the bigger picture, see the visualization of what could happen if you A, B, and C, right?
Mm.
Now, I kind of want, you mentioned before, you start companies, build companies, startups. How did you get into that? I mean, you went to school for psychology, right?
Psychology and business.
And business. Okay, so
Yeah.
and business. Okay, so what intrigued you about partnering with startups, about building, or is it building or scaling businesses? Or do you do
Building.
both? Building. Okay. What intrigued you about that?
So going back to being young, for some weird reason that my parents haven't been able to explain,
Mhm.
when I was like 5 years old, we had a tree in our garden which had some fruit. So I would pick down the fruit and I would go out in front of our apartment, the house, and stand in the street and yell at people, being like, "Hey, come and buy this fruit." Um, what I thought I was like a really good business person selling stuff. I learned later that most of them probably bought because there was a cute little kid standing and trying to sell something, right? And it was
Yeah.
like
But
just like
just keep
here's
that
some
in
money.
mind that you're a good
Yeah,
business person.
it was my one of it was a profitable business.
Yeah, there
Um,
you go.
but since that early age, when I was a little bit older, I would buy sodas and different things. We have a big festival in the town that I'm from, and I was probably like 11, 12, and I would enroll one of my classmates to help me stand and sell that in front of the festival when like they were on the way because there wasn't something to drink. So for some weird reason, I also had too many like ideas for things that I wanted to build, mainly like solve problems. If there was something like, hey, this is a problem, I was like, hey, why don't we solve that? So
Mhm.
that's been since I was a small kid. Yeah, again, too many ideas. I drove my parents nuts with like too many things I wanted to build.
Yeah.
And I found that entrepreneurship is one of the ways to really solve problems. That you can also do it in a big company. So for me, there's in the startup world, there's a lot of bashing of the big company, but big companies are solving amazing problems as well. I just found that it's easier sometimes to do it through the startup method, and I find that people have a lot of passion for what they're doing, that they love what they're doing, and they're not just showing up for like getting the paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. And we even talked before I hit record about your own, business that you started up just because you were solving a problem, right? So we need more ideas and we need more people to bring those ideas to light. Because there is a lot of holes that need to be filled. But people like you, it's just it's phenomenal that we have people like idea generators, but also creators
The
to fill
execution
execution. Yes,
is so important because
yes.
there's so many good ideas, but the
There's
hard thing is really the execution, and you learn that as well. Like when I went from just having ideas to actually trying to get them out in life, that's a completely different story.
oh, it's
But
it's a wonderful feeling.
yeah,
It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Okay, I'm gonna put this out there. Hopefully, it doesn't go out wrong. It's like birthing a baby, right? It's like it's your baby. It's like you're putting things together. You're creating this, and when it comes to fruition, it's like, oh my god, this it's just the best feeling. I mean, yeah,
it feels
awesome.
fantastic, and it's fantastic to work with entrepreneurs. So like when I work with other entrepreneurs as well, and what I find often is a lot of challenges for a founder. It's not, some of them are with the business. A lot of it is also being aligned with yourself, what you want to do and where you want to go, and be very clear on it. And then once you get closer to those things, and what you want to do and work on in the business, the the other things become much easier to coach them on afterwards. So
Yeah,
once you get really clear on like where you want to go, what you stand for, what's important for you, it's much easier to find those more like technical like solutions to solving the business problems.
yeah. I have a little bit of a story. So I was trying to do my own startup like 2 years ago. Um, it was a good experience. And the reason why I say it was a good experience, even though I didn't proceed with it, because I knew there was a lot of self-development in that. It's a lot of understanding who you are, what you want, how who you are, like what do you want to get out of a business, right? Who are you in this business? And I'm not a because so the what I was putting together was basically using virtual reality and meditation and mashing it together for uh like companies, corporate wellness kind of thing. It was a struggle for me. I love the meditation part. I saw the big picture. I was like, this is so needed in the world. And the technology is here, right?
Mm.
I just didn't get that technology part. I was not that passionate in that because that was not my wheelhouse. However, it was more or less not just the execution of that part, it's the execution of what I wanted to bring to the table. I had the idea, but I needed moving parts to create that idea. And I didn't know that until, very later on. I was doing everything myself. I was partnering with somebody else, like a neuroscientist, but it's just, it was just too much for me. But I realized who I was and what I wanted out of my business in a
Mm.
business. Yeah.
And what you're speaking about there is one of the most important things, because we have this idea of how it's going to be, but we rarely think it all the way through of like what. So we have this idea and we want to make a change in the world.
Yeah.
But one of the important things is figuring out like that change that you want to make in the world, what is your role going to be in it? So many people, they actually end up building or setting them up for a company where if they succeed, they don't like their life.
Yeah.
They're not doing the role, and like the role of doing or building this business or the task that they have to do is not going to make them happy. So it might be a completely different business they have to build, or they should actually take a wonderful corporate job with amazing colleagues where they can work only on the things that they love to do.
Right.
That's the amazing thing about corporates. You can be much more specialized, where when you run a business, it takes a while before you can like only focus on one thing, right? And that's something that no one teaches us, or at least I wasn't taught either. Like
Right.
I was really surprised when I started my first more serious business about all the things that I had to do. Where I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here that I don't want to do. There's a lot of stuff that I
Right.
love to do, but
Right.
like my
Uh,
consulting job in management consulting, there was like I loved the majority of the things I was doing. Where in the startup there was a lot more tasks I didn't like. There was that difference of like it being my baby and that I wanted to build and so on. So you can also endure a lot of other tasks, right? But getting clear on that part, I find is extremely important for all entrepreneurs.
yeah. No, I mean, and that's spot on. Again, it all goes back to the self-development, right? It all goes back to the understanding who we are and what we want out of life. Because I think the businesses would, will thrive better if the founders and the owners and the CEOs, if they know exactly specifically who they are, what they want, how can they execute, how can they run the business. Obviously you're not going to know from A to Z in the first hand. You're going to go through all of the alphabet just to get there. But if you know A to B, right? If you know A to B, you could definitely get climbing onto A to B. And a lot of it has to do with, who am I? How do I work with others? Do I work with others? Do I work well with others? Am I an individual? Am I a team player? Do I want to be on the level? Do I want to, be a manager?
Hmm.
So those are the questions that we always have to ask, especially if we're entrepreneurs. It's like, it's a never ending figuring out of, because we're growing, right? But it's also understanding who we are intrinsically and all that. So awesome. So I want to kind of skip ahead a little bit. Excuse me. Let's talk about biohacking. Now, I heard about biohacking. I heard obviously here, I don't know if you're familiar, Bulletproof, Dave
Dave Asprey.
Asprey. Yeah. So, huge biohacker. He talks about biohacking a lot. I mean, people obviously around here, talks about biohacking this, biohacking age, all of that fun stuff. I've never heard of Nordic biohacking. So can you please explain what, maybe even the differences, or what is Nordic biohacking?
Sure. So biohacking came from Dave Asprey. He's at least the one that's known to coining biohacking. So when we talk about Nordic biohacking, it's kind of a form of the biohacking, but where
Mhm.
we took a little bit of a different way, or more like a focus of the biohacking. So we say it's the art and science of optimizing your health, performance, and well-being through the use of nature and technology.
Nice.
So the big difference you could say is that we focus very much on nature and then technology. So we love gadgets. Like I have too many weird gadgets. I love to be able to measure things. I had stuff on my brain measuring like all the crazy stuff that you see as well very much in the US. But kind of the way that it's evolving in the Nordic region, at least many of us that are leaders within it, it's very much about the nature part. So we look at first, can we find a natural way, and then if we can, like how do we bring in technology? So it's basically just that we look at that. Dave Asprey also looks at the nature part. The American biohackers also do, but it is that focus on nature first, and then technology, and then we don't focus as much on chips in the fingers or in the hand and so on. But we still love like cryotherapy, hyperbaric oxygen chambers, red light. I have a big panel here in my living room. We do blood tests to make sure that we figure out like what should we actually eat and what supplements should we take. Cold waters. saunas, which is very big in the Nordic, especially in Finland. I think I don't remember the number, but like if you look it up on Google, how many saunas are in Finland, you're gonna be like, that can't be true if there's so few people there.
It's like Starbucks here. It's on every corner, huh?
It is crazy. So but so that's kind of how we're looking at it. So it's a form of biohacking, but where we have to focus very much on nature as much as technology.
Nice. I like that. I like that because yes, technology has its part, has its role, right? But I personally, I'm all about getting back to nature. I'm all about, that is where we originated from. Technology is here to help assist, and I call it maybe a supplement. But I love the fact that technology is the forefront of, I mean, not technology, excuse me, nature is the forefront of this biohacking, um, theme that you're going with. So I love it. And how long have you been putting it together?
So I probably got into it 5 years ago, I think now.
Okay.
Time flies, if not longer.
Okay.
Started with,
Nice.
uh, I started within functional medicine, is what I
Okay.
learned about first. And then I got introduced to biohacking at an event, it was probably longer ago actually, at Tony Robbins, one of Tony Robbins' event. Dave Asprey was there. And he
Nice.
was standing on the stage and explaining about biohacking. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. I love studies. I love that we're actually looking at what works and what doesn't work, at least for the majority of people. And that he also talks about some natural part and so on. Like, I have to follow that. And then I saw like, okay, there's a lot of parts from functional medicine that I've learned about before as well.
Mhm.
Um, and like that whole, like one of the big things within biohacking is n equals one, meaning that the sample size is one. So we look at studies, that's why we call it the art and science. We
Mhm.
look at studies, what are the studies saying works for the majority of people? But we're also very aware that there's those outliers. You might be an outlier.
Mhm.
So this study might not be beneficial for you. So just like when I talked about with the studies for building habits, it works for the majority of people. It helps if you really believe that it works as well, because then you're going to be more likely to follow through. But there will be people that it is not as effective for. You
Yeah.
talked about different things psychologically you might have and so on. So I love that approach of being like, okay, let's try and find the studies. Let's start with the studies and test that on ourselves. Try and get some data to figure out is this working or not, and then also go into the more ancestral wisdom. So ancestral wisdom, like meditation, used to be ancestral wisdom. Like what do we go 20 years back,
Mhm.
25 now?
Yeah.
People would think you were crazy if you said that meditation could be good for you. It's like you're like you're like people would use really bad
You're
words.
crazy. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
but it was more probably well known in like India and China,
Yes.
all of where it originated from. But yeah, here and probably Europe, yeah, 20
But
years
Western
ago would be a
science only caught up. We used to think the brain couldn't change after we became an adult. That was like scientifically proven. Like that's how it is, and you cannot
yeah.
discuss with science. So that's why I love, or we love ancestral wisdom, like meditation. Now the science caught up, showing that hey, it like we can now show it with Western science as well that this works. Hypnotherapy is something that's been used for so long, and we are getting more and more studies now proving that as well. Fasting is one of the hottest things when it comes to longevity. It's something that saves you time, it saves you money, it's
Yes, I'm
easier to
right
lose
there.
weight. Like there's so many
Yeah.
good things. That's been a practice as well for centuries. We used to in several places in Asia and in Italy as well. You would eat the protein and the fats first, and then you would eat the carbs later. Intuitively, like the rice would come later. The rice might be cold. We now know that to keep a more stable blood sugar level, your glucose levels, you eat proteins and fats first and then carbs in the end. So many things that we used to do that we haven't really known why. Now because we have technology, and that's also why we do love technology in Nordic
Mhm.
biohacking. Like you can get a continuous glucose monitor on. So now
Yeah.
you have data on seeing like if you eat this and this is what it does to your body. So it's so fascinating. So we still like, even though we love those double-blinded studies and that stuff, still super curious and then try what is ancestral wisdom, and can we then test, does it work for you? And that can be subjective or objective, whether it's a blood test, whether it's like writing down, like I feel like I had this much energy today.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. The data that we're consuming, which is good because the more understanding we are of how our bodies work and how our minds work and how what works, what happened when this happened, all of that is, to me, is a blessing, because I'm all about everybody taking, empowering ourselves with the knowledge of how we could, I guess I'll say it, biohack our own health.
Mm.
Is understanding, we have the power. We have the power to make ourselves, live longer and live healthier and longer.
And,
So yeah, I love it.
and that's
Awesome.
so empowering to know that we can actually do something. I think one of the worst things is if you're in that victimhood, feeling
Yes.
there's nothing you can do. That's also
Yes.
why functional medicine, I love what you're doing. It's so empowering. Like, okay, you might have met the normal system and they say there's nothing you can do, but there's like millions of miracles, as they would call it, out there. When you go to functional medicine, you figure out what is the root cause and you can do something about it. So
Yeah.
whether you go to functional medicine because you're sick, or you use biohacking to go like from okay to great, or you
Right.
use some of the tools, like functional medicine is a very ingrained part, at least for how biohacking looks at how to optimize themselves, right?
Right. Right on. Right on. So let's get in with your podcast. I want to hear more. I love the title, Growth Island. I mean, first of all, who doesn't like to be on an island? And second of all, growth is just what we all need, a growth mindset. So tell me a little bit more about this podcast. How did you come about it? And then what is it about?
Sure. So the name Growth Island really came from, I'm very focused on growth. And I believe that we should kind of have that island we can go to focus on growth and be the best version of ourselves. So that's the focus of the podcast, is like, how do you become the best version of yourself? How do you live a happy, healthy, and meaningful life? Back to the questions when I was younger and that curiosity. And then getting experts from around the world, whether it's doctors, whether it's psychologists, researchers, top athletes, and then try and get their knowledge and make it super simple in a digestible form so someone can learn it very easily. So I try to help make it easier to understand and also get their knowledge out to another audience that might not hear it otherwise. There's a lot of functional medicine on as well, actually. I have a ton of episodes where we go into some of the things that functional medicine can do.
Yeah. And and that's good. The more we spread it, the more we spread the knowledge of it, the better it is. And yes, sometimes it could be, scientific and technical in certain aspects, but I mean, we have to know these things. We have
Mm.
to know these things, and the only way we're going to do it is by listening to these podcasts. So that's awesome.
There's one thing I try really with the podcast also. I
Yeah.
found when I was learning a lot of information, I had like 80% was focused on problems
Okay.
and then only 20% the solutions. And like, if you know you have a problem, you know you have a problem. So I feel like let's spend 20% on just like, okay, this is a problem. We agree on that. We can do that quite fast.
Right.
But let's focus 80% on what can we actually do, the empowering stuff, instead of just dwelling in like, oh, this is so tough and so on. I
Yeah.
think one of the reasons why it's often that when you hear stuff is because people are selling something. So they spend 80% of the time ensuring that you really buy into this problem, then 20% a little bit about some of the solutions, and then you have to buy something more. So I really make an effort in the podcast to make sure like, okay, we quickly establish this is a challenge. How do we deal with it? Like, what
Yeah.
are some strategies? What are some concrete things that we can actually do? What are some frameworks? What are the exact things so you can actually start doing something? Because I believe that empowerment, as you spoke to as well, that's the
Yeah.
important thing. And it's important going back to happiness. Like we can live in hardship as long as we can feel there's a way out and we can see there's a path.
Yeah.
Victor Franklin, A Man's Search for Meaning, one of an
Yes.
extremely
Love
popular
that
book,
book.
right?
Yeah.
Like you can live through a lot of stuff, but you have to believe there's a way out. Um, and that's why I really love to focus more on like, hey, there is a way out. What can you actually do?
I am all about that. I am all about that. That's what I do also with this podcast is, yes, there are many, 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 many problems out there, many issues. We all have them, we all know them. But I think people in general are searching for solutions,
Mm,
right? They're searching for solutions. And if you give those solutions or those tips and the whatever to the audience or to these people, and obviously you're I guess, giving it away for free, right? But in turn, that's not for free because, maybe that person's going to go to you, always listen to you, maybe buy some. So that'll, instead of saying, what you just said, 80% problem, 20% solution, because you want to have them buy something, give them 20% problem, 80% solution, because then they're going to trust you. Then they're going to go on an emotional roller coaster with you. Then they're going to want to buy something from you. Might not be like right away, but once they keep listening to you and once they like really buy into you and your, the emotion that you evoke, and even the free knowledge. I mean, even if it's the free knowledge that, I don't know, that you put out even in your courses or something. Um, it's a lot of times people want to individualize. It's not, when we do these podcasts, it's more of a generalization. But when somebody comes to us asking for help in more individualized manner, then we can do that one-on-one personal experience with them. And I think you doing that as well, like putting out more or less like, this is the problem, but hey, here are all the ways we can, solve that problem. I think people are going to resonate more with that than anything. So awesome. Love it. Well, Mass, I could talk to you forever. And I know I say this a lot, but really I lost track of time and I was in the flow.
Fantastic.
Because
Same
of,
here.
right, because of what we talk about. You're passionate about it. I'm, really passionate about these topics, because we covered a range of them. But where can people find you? Where can people reach out to you? And yeah, let us know.
Sure. Thank you. So my website is growthisland.com, the same as my podcast.
Nice.
That's a place to find me. Then my podcast is also Growth Island.
Okay.
And on Instagram, I'm fairly active with Mads M. Friis.
Nice.
That's hard to spell. I think we can get in the show notes.
I will definitely put it in there. Yes. The
Yeah.
link. Yep.
LinkedIn as well is a place that I'm at. Those are the main places. My podcast and YouTube under Growth Island as well. So in
Awesome.
general, like searching for Growth Island, then I hopefully should show up.
You should be number one on that, huh?
There's
Yes.
one video on YouTube that has, I think it was more than 1 million views, just one video. Very weird one, like something kids that kind of shows up on YouTube quite fast. But otherwise, it should be doable to find.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. I'll definitely link all of those in the show notes. So all they have to do is click on it and it takes them there. So, Mass, I want to acknowledge you because I have one last question, but I want to acknowledge you for doing what you do, for having the curiosity that you did as a young child and bringing that curiosity into life now and bringing it into the world for others to see and hear because of the podcast. So I want to acknowledge you for showing up, for doing the work that you're doing, and also for being on this podcast. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your just everything in general on here. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me, and also like doing this podcast to get it out and working with functional medicine so more people actually make those changes in their life and see those miracles that they've been told can't happen, right?
Yes.
That's fantastic to have.
Thank you. Yeah. So last question I have is, what is a favorite quote or any words of inspiration that you can give to my audience?
Life is not about, I don't know say it right. It's not about, how is it with the wind? That was a long thinking thought. It's the classic with life is not about in the storm. It's about dancing in the sea. How did I lose that suddenly? But
Okay.
basically, it's life will happens, challenges will come.
Got it.
It's about learning how to deal with that and get
Yeah.
the most out of it.
Yes.
So the stormy weather, instead of hiding, learn to dance in the rain.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being on here. Link everything in the show notes. It was a pleasure. So until next time, have a great one.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right. Take care.